use headphones for best experience. Thanks for your fantastic support. Hi. Welcome to another video. This is going to be another globe video. I haven't done a globe video for quite a while now. I think I've done a lot of map-related videos lately about different maps from the Earth. So I think it was about time that I paid some attention to our closest neighbor of the superior planets, the planets that are more far away from the sun than we are on the Earth. So this is going to be a video about Mars. And read a lot of interesting, fascinating facts about Mars lately. Also bought this fantastic globe. But now the question is where to start, because it's a whole planet, and I usually start at the coastline. And the thing is that Mars has no coastline. It's just a red, kind of dead desert planet. But let's start with the fact that it's red, because that was one of the first things that could be observed by ancient astronomers around the world. And it's actually the Mesopotamians, or the Babylonians in the Mesopotamian culture, really long time ago, thousands of years ago, that associated this red color with war. Also in ancient time in China it was called the star of fire. So it was a star that you could see was bit more red in the color than other stars, and also it moved much faster than the static stars in the sky. So it was something special about it. It wasn't just a star, but it was somehow associated to war because of these features, I guess. And the Greeks, they were inspired by the Mesopotamian cultures, and they named it after their god of war, Ares. And in ancient Rome, they followed this pattern and named it after their god of war, then things started to happen. It actually took a while, but in the 16th century, the heliocentric model of the solar system and the universe was presented and somehow eventually accepted. It was presented by Copernicus in 1543, I think. And shortly after, or yeah, at least during the next century, they started to use telescopes. Astronomers started to use telescopes to study the planets, the stars. But then you can see planets like Mars much more close up. And Galilei is believed to be the first person to use a telescope to observe Mars around 1610. And then things started to happen. In 1659 there were some astronomers, or there was one astronomer called Christian Huygens, Dutch astronomer. And as the telescopes became better and better, you could see more and more details with them. So he observed it and then drew the first known map of Mars. And it looked something like this. So here we have 3 sketches of Mars seen through a 17th century telescope. And you could really see there were some areas of darker color, some pattern here. And it's called Albedo Feature, if you can see it from Earth. Kind of variation. And he called this part of Mars the Great Marsh, because he thought it was like a marsh, or water in a way, some lake, some ocean, something. And in Latin that would be Syrtis Major. I think it is in Latin. And it's called Syrtis Major today. Here you can see Syrtis Major Planum. It's really dark area here. Also in some angles it could resemble that hourglass or some kind of boot. So I don't know exactly where the hourglass shape could be located. Maybe here. So it's still called Syrtis Major, and you can see it's a distinct darker color here, and it's because of the red color of Mars is actually the surface dust, a thick layer of dust. But at some places it's not as thick as in others. So this particular plane, I think it's I'm not sure, but I think it's a bit more high altitude than the surroundings here. This is a basin, the Isidis or Isidis Planitia or basin, huge impact basin here. And maybe the dust somehow becomes more concentrated in basins like this. I don't know exactly why, but it's not evenly spread on the surface. And it's actually the dust on the surface that gives Mars its red color, because it's mostly iron oxide or rust. But under the surface it's the rocks and the minerals have many different colors, just like on Earth. And when you had this fixed point on the surface of Mars, you could start to calculate the rotation of the planet, and they noticed that it rotated approximately in the same speed as the Earth. So one Martian day is 24 hours and about 40 minutes. So this was discovered quite early, actually. Also, Huygens noticed this ice cap here, that there actually was polar ice. And as the telescopes became better, they started to see more and more details. You observe the south polar cap as well. There. And in 1830 a meridian was selected, because the equator, it's kind of obvious where the equator should be, but the meridian you have to just select. And there were two astronomers in 1830 that selected this, suggested this as the meridian: Johann Heinrich Mädler and William Beer. So this is now called the Meridian Planum. Meridiani Planum. meets the equator. And Mars is about the diameter of it, if you measure. It's about half the size of the Earth diameter. And the mass is about 11%, I think, around 10%. It's not as dense as the Earth, and it has quite a low gravity, 1/3 of the Earth's gravity. So it's not easy for water to stay on the surface. And that's also because of the atmosphere, because it's really thin. And it consists mostly of carbon dioxide. And because it's so thin, also the pressure is really low. And that's also why water can't stay on the surface. But water can be locked in ice. And Mars has approximately the same angle, rotation angle as the Earth. So it has seasons. But it rotates the Sun in approximately 2 years. So the years are, the length of the years are doubled in a way. Not exactly, but you can think of it as doubled. One Martian year is 669 sols, and sol is the Martian day, so it's not exactly 1 day on Earth. And this is equivalent to 687 Earth days. But let's continue with the early observations of Mars. Like I said, the telescopes became better and better. And Mars and the Earth sometimes are in something called the opposition. And that's when they are closest to each other, because they have their orbits like this around the Sun, and every 2 years or so they're close to each other. And that's when it's really good to observe Mars from the Earth, because they're so close. Also, every 15th to 17th year, something like that, they're in something called the perihelic opposition. And then they're even more close, because they have somehow different elliptical orbits, and so every 15th year it's even better to observe. And this happened in 2018 actually, and before that it must have been in 2003 something. So, but during the 1877 opposition, there was an Italian astronomer called Giovanni Schiaparelli. And he makes the first really detailed map of Mars. And it looked like this. And he imagined that half of the surface would be an ocean, because it was somehow darker. And then there were pieces of land named after, I think, mostly Greek mythology, or maybe from the Bible. Here we have Hellas. Very distinct shape in the southern hemisphere. So for some reason he thought that almost the entire southern hemisphere was an ocean, some islands, and a lot of land in the northern hemisphere, and a lot of something reminds of canals here, and he named everything. And actually many of these names are still used today, so you can find a lot of these names on the globe here. So here we have Arabia, Crisi, Argyre, Hellas, Elysium. See if we can find them on the globe. Here's Elysium Planitia. Crisi Planitia. Arabia Terra. Hellas Planitia. Huge impact crater. I think it's the third largest crater in the solar system that's been found. Argyre Planitia. But the thing is that actually what he supposed to be lower altitude and oceans is actually the opposite in reality, because these are the highlands in the southern hemisphere that must have looked darker in his telescope. And then he read that as oceans, just like you remember the Syrtis Major Planum here. It's darker. It's easy to think it's an ocean if you think it's water on Mars, of course. And almost the entire, or most parts of the northern hemisphere, is a really, really flat lowland. And this is where Schiaparelli thought he saw all these continents and these canals. And this is also a map of that Schiaparelli made some years later. More details and a lot of more of these canals, as you can see. Yeah, it should be upside down. I think some of these maps are upside down because the image in the telescope always turned out upside down in a way. So it's Mare Australia, the southern ocean here on top of this map. So you should actually look at this way. But all these canals made people start to imagine that, or start to think about what could it mean? Why are there so many canal-like features on Mars? And an astronomer called Camille Flammarion wrote a lot of books about the canals and about an intelligent race that could use the canals to redistribute the water across a dying Martian world. And this was written in 1892. And he also assumed that these Martians were more advanced than humans. And these thoughts of the canals really triggered the imaginations of many people, astronomers and others. And you maybe should keep in mind that during this time, late 19th century, there were a lot of canal building on the earth. So the Suez Canal had been completed in 1869, and they started to build the Panama Canal during this time as well. So if you thought of a really intelligent civilization somehow and what they could do, maybe you would think of canals as the really high-tech, the most high-tech you could think about somehow. Maybe these Martians could look like this. Or like this. Maybe like this. Or like this. I think this is my favorite. And yeah, they had to get water from the ice caps because their planet was drying. So even though it had been water here, now the water was locked in the polar caps, so they built these canals to spread it to the equator, distribute it. And one person who really was triggered by this idea, he was called Percival Lowell, and he founded an observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, that he used for the exploration of Mars and its canals. And this was in 1894, and he published many books. One called Mars in 1895, one called Mars and its Canals in 1906, and one called Mars as the Abode of Life in 1908. So he really adopted the idea of these canals. It started with the Schiaparelli's maps of the surface of Mars. in the early 20th century, there were some doubts about this, about the canals, and yeah, maybe it was just optical illusions. That's probably what it was. Sometimes when you look into a light directly for hours and hours and just don't have a camera or anything, just have to stare at the light and then draw what you see, maybe it's not so uncommon to see a lot of, like, if there are dots, if you see like dots of darker color, maybe you see some lines in between them. It's like an optical effect, I guess. So I guess there were many reasons why you could see these canals, because yeah, there were no photographic technology by this time, so no one has ever managed to get a photo of these canals. It's just drawings and imagination, I guess. But then in the 20th century we entered the space age, and the first successful flyby to Mars was in 1965, NASA's Mariner 4, and it took some photos of the surface of Mars, and yeah, you could really see there were no canals. And then followed a lot of more orbiters and spacecrafts during the late 60s, early 70s, and the first landings on Mars in 1971. I think you can see it here on the globe. So here on the southern hemisphere, it's Mars 3, USSR in 1971. But unfortunately, contact was lost almost immediately. And this was in the Terra Sirenum area to the south here. It's a really interesting area where scientists today think could be a good spot for search for life, or yeah, previous life on Mars, if you dig a bit into the surface. Because what they found there is there are some salt, there are some thick salt layers here. And it's also a big crater called Newton crater. And craters and salt are really good for, if there have been life in the past, the salt could like preserve evidence of life. And the craters are good because kind of like if you watch the walls, in a way, inner walls of a crater, you can see different, can trace time, I think, through the walls, just like archaeology always do, like tracing sediments, go back in time. And it's believed that it's been ancient ponds and lakes in this area, but that it was evaporated at some point. But also in 1971 we had NASA's Mariner 9 that orbited around Mars and took a lot of photos and discovered a lot. The image of Mars changed radically. Dust storms were discovered and dormant volcanoes. For example, it's a huge volcano. See here, Olympus Mons. It's 22 kilometers high. That's 2.5 times Mount Everest. It's the tallest, one of the tallest mountains in the entire solar system. Largest volcano in the solar system. Also in this area, Tarsis Montes, there are 3 giant volcanoes. Arsia Mons, Pavonis Mons, Ascraeus Mons. Just at the equator. So this is a really mountainous area. And also one feature that Mariner 9 discovered were these valles marineris. Gave name to this, and it's a supersized canyon. Actually, you can compare it to Grand Canyon, but times 10 or something like that. It's like 10 times longer than Grand Canyon. It's 4 times deeper, 12 times wider. And it's a really interesting area. I guess the view from there can't be compared with anything else. And also connected to this area here, there's Ares valleys. So a lot of, yeah, could possibly say canals or channels, where it's believed to have been floating water back in time. If there were liquid water on the surface of Mars at some point, then the water could flow from these mountainous areas through these valles marineris and other gullies and rifts, floating into oceans and seas like Chryse Planitia, for example. Part of the lowland in the north. And in Chryse Planitia, it's actually where the first successful landing happened, or was located in 1976. Viking 1 landed July 20th, 1976. So let's see where Viking 2 landed. Yeah, here in the north. In something called Utopia Planitia. September 3rd, 1976. And then there were more photos sent to Earth, of course, of Mars' surface. Also more while they were orbiting as well around the planet. And Viking 1 actually sent a photo that captured some interest. It looked something like this. More exactly like this. So this was a photo from the Cydonia region. See if I can find it. So here's Chryse Planitia. The Viking 1 landing spot. Here, Cydonia Mensae. So it's just in this region between the highlands to the south and this probably an ancient ocean, Chryse Planitia, to the northwest. And this area borders the Acidalia Planitia, another big area of lowlands, and also darker in color, as you can see. Here there are possible mud volcanoes. That's really interesting because when it's mud, it's really a nice place where you can search for life, past or present life. When this image became public in 1976, there were a lot of theories about extraterrestrial intelligence and speculations that this was actually evidence of a long-lost Martian civilization. And they thought they saw pyramids in this area as well, like it was some kind of monument. I think it's 1.5 kilometer in size. So that there were some huge ancient monuments. ruined city. And it could be speculations about that for quite some time, because then it took a while before we received any more detailed images and maps of Mars. I guess the focus was more on the other planets, the Voyager program during the late 70s and the 80s, with the beautiful new pictures of Venus, Mercury, the asteroids, Saturn, Jupiter, and but then in 1997 the next mission to Mars took place. And this is a more recent photo of the same area, the Cydonia region. So I guess it wasn't a humanoid face at all, it was just a rock. So a lot of more detailed pictures were received in 1997 through the Mars Global Surveyor program. And also in the FBC program in 1997, it was the Pathfinder lander and the Sojourner rover that landed on the surface of Mars. Let's see if I can find the location. Yeah, here it is. Mars Pathfinder landed July 4th, 1997. So it was in this really interesting area, close to Cydonia, close to Ares valleys, close to Cruce Planitia, that I've talked about a lot. And this was the first time actually a rover was sent to the surface of Mars, and it didn't travel for a very long distance, I think only 100 meters or 330 feet before the communication was lost. But at least it was a start. And then in 2001 NASA sent the Odyssey orbiter that returned over 100,000 images of the surface. In 2003, European Space Agency sent a lander and orbiter. Let's see if I can find the landing spot here. Viking. Here. It says Beagle 2 UK landed, contact lost December 25th, 2003 in the Isidis Planitia, this huge basin here. So the contact was unfortunately lost. But then in 2004 NASA sent Spirit and Opportunity. And now let's see here. Opportunity landed January 25th, 2004 in the Meridiani Planum, close to the meridian and the equator. And actually Opportunity rover was on Mars for many years. Also Spirit, that landed on the opposite side of the planet, somewhere here. Spirit landed January 4th, 2004. A bit south of the equator. And Spirit traveled for 7 kilometers or 5 miles before it died in a sand dune in March 2010. So for 6 years actually Spirit was here. Opportunity landed near a small crater called the Endurance crater. See if I can zoom in a bit. But it traveled and saw a crater also called Victoria, also a small crater, and eventually ended up in the Endeavour crater and something called the Spirit Point. And observed the rim of this crater. I'm not sure exactly, it could be this one, the Endeavour crater. Found a lot of information here. Traveled 45 kilometers or 28 miles between 2004 and summer 2018. And it fell silent during a sandstorm last summer. And the mission was declared over in early 2019. So it's not so long time ago. And then in 2008, NASA sent the stationary lander Mars Phoenix to the very north of the planet. So here you can see the spot. It landed on May 25th, 2008. Close to the northern polar ice cap. And actually Phoenix found water ice just beneath the surface. So that was really great news for all the scientists that look for water on this planet. So it's like water can't, because of the low atmosphere, low pressure, and almost no magnetic field on this planet. It's not possible for water to stay on the surface, like I said. But it could be a lot of water, ice water, just beneath the ground. also locked in the polar cap. It's actually been shown that this consists of water ice, but during the winter for the northern hemisphere, the polar ice grows just like on the Earth. But that's no new water ice. That's carbon dioxide ice. And then in the spring, when it gets warmer, it melts, and carbon dioxide ice doesn't melt into liquid water, it melts directly into gas form. But there are some water ice here that doesn't disappear during the year. On the South Pole there hasn't been any evidence of water ice at all. So here the ice that the static ice here consists of carbon dioxide. And I saw a documentary on YouTube about a really cool phenomenon happening here in the spring, the southern hemisphere spring, when it gets warmer, because then the carbon dioxide underneath the frozen carbon dioxide becomes gas form, evaporate into gas, and it creates like geysers, jets of dirt from the ground, and it's like raining on the frozen carbon dioxide surface here. This dirt that just spouts out, it creates like a airbrush pattern that looks really cool, and nothing like this can be seen on Earth, so it's a completely new discovered nature phenomenon. And then we have 2012 in the Gale crater. Let's see if we can find it. This is also south of the equator, south of Elysium Planitia, where Curiosity landed, also Rover, in August 6th, 2012. And Curiosity discovering this crater, the Gale crater, is chosen because, yeah, I guess, like I said, craters are really good for if you want to look for signs of past or present life. And also in the middle of this crater, it's a big mountain called Mount Sharp. And just at the base of that mountain, it has found a lot of evidence for water in the past. That's basically what all the scientists talk about: water, evidence of water. At least what I've seen so far. It's actually a quite interesting crater called Orcus Patera. Look at the shape of it. It's like a teardrop. not round like most of the craters. It's believed that this was created from a meteorite that was really in high speed coming from outer space and in a very low angle. Very low angle like this hit the ground and created this very unusual shape of a crater. Curiosity has traveled now for approximately 21 kilometers. It was reported in July 2019. That's about 13 miles. Since 2012. So they're not traveling so fast, these rovers. But I guess that's not the point anyway. There's a crater called the Geological crater. Should be located between Isidis Planitia and the Syrtis Major Planum somewhere. Could it be this one perhaps? I'm not completely sure. But this is where the one of the next rovers and landers will land in 2021. The Mars 2020 program that hasn't got another name yet. And also we have the Rosalind Franklin rover lander that will go to Oxyaplanum in 2021. Oxyaplanum. It says Oxyacoles here somewhere. It's in this interesting area with all these Ares valleys and all these gullies. Possibly old rivers are located, because this is a really mountainous region. These are the valles marinaries. These look like valleys, and this could be an ancient ocean. And Rosalind Franklin is a collaboration between European Space Agency and Roscosmos State Corporation. It's a European-Russian mission. So many scientists believe that the Earth and Mars at the very beginning were quite similar, developed in the same way. So the geological history of Mars, it's divided into time periods like the Noachian period, or first the pre-Noachian period, 4.5 billion years ago to 4 billion years ago, when it was formed, just like the Earth. And it was this heavy bombardment of asteroids and everything that eventually created gravity and planet structure. And then the Noachian period, 4 billion years ago to, and this is just a guess, 3.7 billion years ago. And it's believed that these surfaces with a lot of craters, as you can see on these highlands that were created during this time, you can still see the evidence of heavy bombardment just scattered here all over. And that's why it's called the Noachian period. It's named after this. Let's see here, Noachis Terra. And then we had the Hesperian period. Could be something between 3.7 to 3 billion years ago. Then it's believed that lakes and water existed on the surface. And also life. Just like on Earth, life started quite early. Very primitive life forms in the water. And then something happened that made Earth continue to develop life and Mars didn't. The sea and the water disappeared. The atmosphere out in space. Maybe it could have been because of the solar wind or by a giant meteorite. But it's really interesting, fascinating to think about these areas. I think there once were oceans. Like here in the Vastitas Borealis, giant northern ocean. But it's believed that there were a lot of volcanic activity during Hesperian time, and maybe also in the Amazonian period that followed. Here's Amazonis Planitia, named this last period, that lasted from about 3 billion years ago to present. So it's believed that this dry and inhospitable planet have looked like this for like 3 billion years perhaps. And these giant volcanoes created like a more smooth landscape that covered these early craters from the Noachian period. So you can see here around these Olympus Mons and the Tarsis Mons. It's a completely different kind of surface. I think that's what I wanted to show you today about Mars. So a lot of, I couldn't believe it was so much places named on this planet. Let's see what happens in the next years, following years. What we will discover. Thank you so much for watching. Sleep well.